Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Fertility Confidence Podcast. I have an interview for you today with Maja Miller. She's a metabolic health coach, functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and it was so nice to sit down with her and talk about her own fertility journey and getting pregnant after 40, and what a beautiful, wonderful success story, because she actually had her cutie little baby boy strapped to her chest through our interview, which was so precious. So we had a good conversation about how to use certain testings, how to go a little bit deeper. We talked about your adrenals and how that plays a role, and specifically what she needed to do to really dig into her health, and how she also helps her clients dig into their health, not just to optimize their fertility, but to optimize their overall health and wellness in their bodies, and just to feel really great about themselves moving forward. So you can find more about Maja over at her website, and Maja Miller Wellness is what she goes by. I'll make sure we link everything for you in the show notes, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, Maja, welcome to the Fertility Confidence Podcast.
Oh my gosh. Hello. I'm so excited to be here.
Why don't we start with you just sharing with our listeners a little bit about you?
So my name's Maja Miller, and I am first and foremost a new mom to a 12-week-old little boy named Noah. And before that, before he came along, I spent my days working as a functional diagnostic nutrition professional. I know that's a mouthful, but what that means is that I work with mostly, pretty stressed out women that aren't feeling good in their own bodies. I use clinical labs to figure out kind of what's going on, the root cause of their symptoms. And then I use those labs to put together tailored protocols to reverse those symptoms so that they can, live an inspired life, whether that's, being a mom or growing a business, or, many of the other hats that we tend to wear in life.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit about me.
Amazing. And when we connected, we talked a little bit about how you used what you do in your work and healing your body from the inside out through your fertility journey. So if you would share some of your journey with our listeners, I think they would really appreciate your story.
Yeah, well, I am turning 45 years old in July. So I conceived Noah when I was 44. So I'm pretty old to be a first-time mom. I got married a lot later. I was in my late 30s when I reconnected with my husband. We got married. Neither one of us wanted to jump into, kids right away. We wanted to enjoy each other. I was in the midst of growing a company. And so we were very fortunate where my husband's company paid for IVF. And I had a friend who was a, doctor who just had her first IVF baby. And she was like, "You're nuts if you don't take advantage of this." So we really did IVF as an insurance policy. And I'm so glad that we did, because, life kind of, my life essentially exploded. I had a lot of family and professional things that kind of ended my life as I had known it at the time, which led to a lot of stress. And I got pregnant naturally, but then miscarried about 6 weeks later. And then COVID happened. So we had already, we had done about 4 rounds of retrievals. I got I guess we did 3 rounds of making embryos, 1 round of eggs. We got 3 embryos that were kind of made it through the genetic testing process and were quote unquote perfect. Noah is one of those embryos. And then we've got 2 on ice. And then we're about to fertilize that batch of eggs this week, actually. So that's a little bit about, my fertility journey.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the stress side of things, because before we hit play, we were chit-chatting about how in your work prior to Noah, you were really focused on helping those busy professional women. And I find in Fertility Confidence Method, we also attract a lot of busy professional women. We work with a lot of teachers and lawyers and women in healthcare, and stress, plays such a big role. So how was that coming into both your work, but also through your fertility experience as well?
Well, I've been working in nutrition now for a decade in one way or another. Um, and I can now confidently say that stress is the single largest factor for all of the there's a stress cascade, right? So and it's the most important factor for any symptom that you're experiencing in your body. I'll talk about myself first. Probably in 2019, through kind of culmination of events, I lost my dad, and he was my business partner. We shut down a company that I'd spent the better part of a decade building. My mom was a mess. There was just a lot of things that were kind of happening, and even before then, like, life was kind of stressful. Building a business, being a wife. I had a staff of 32 locations. I mean, there was just a lot happening. And I had never had a problem with like weight or anything like that. But when this massive kind of like stress bomb after stress bomb after stress bomb, like we're talking about like acute prolonged stress, really sent me into HPA axis dysfunction. And so for folks that are listening to this, some people may call that, adrenal fatigue, but it stands for the hypothalamus, which signals to the pituitary, which signals to the adrenals, that access, in your brain and your adrenals. And that's that stress. I mean, I put on close to 70 pounds. So I went from in like 130, 140 to almost, at one point I was almost 200 pounds. I mean, a massive amount of weight for somebody that was always like petite and small, and former Division I athlete, multiple marathoner, loads of anxiety, couldn't get to sleep. If I did get to sleep, then I would wake up in the middle of the night. Depression. I mean, so many like skin issues. I mean, my symptoms were just all over the place, and weight gain that like was really, really difficult for me to get a handle on. And it really also impacted my gut health. And so all of these things are very important when you are about to grow another human being in your own body, right? And so stress, there's this kind of like stress cascade that happens. So, when you have unresolved stressors that, aren't addressed, they lead to symptoms, and eventually it leads to dis-ease, so disease. And I recognized that, okay, I need to address, I addressed a bunch of things, but before I tried to get pregnant. So I worked on, stuff for about a year, 2 years before I got pregnant, and then lost the pregnancy. And I realized at that point that I still had more work to do. And so that's where I kind of ran the same clinical labs that I run on my clients. I ran them on myself, and just told myself I needed to have a little bit more patience. And I'm really, really glad that I did, because I had the easiest pregnancy, and Noah is like the easiest baby now. And I think that what we don't actually realize is that as women, if we are constantly stressed out, especially when we have babies in utero, we are hardwiring that child's central nervous system, autonomic nervous system, into a fight or flight mode. And so what I think a lot of us don't realize that we're doing, unless you have a healthcare background, or a nutrition background, a wellness background, you don't realize that you're actually kind of mapping your child's nervous system to have anxiety and depression and all sorts of things later on. And if we take a look at the anxiety numbers and depression numbers and autoimmune numbers of our overall general population, we can start seeing a connection to that.
Yeah, I find that so it's fascinating because my son, who's almost 7 now, I was pregnant with him when I was finishing my final year of clinical rotation at med school, and I wrote my licensing exams with him in
Oh
utero.
man.
And we are going through some challenges with him with anxiety and things like that. And it always comes back to me wondering, like, how was it for him through my pregnancy? Because it was not a good environment. So I think it's a really interesting discussion when we talk about how stress impacts fertility, but how stress also impacts our children once
Yeah,
we
and
are pregnant is really interesting.
and it's not fun having this conversation, right? Because like we as women and mothers want nothing but the best. And oftentimes you don't know, right? Like we live in a society where it's go, 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 where it's, you know, I just had a conversation with my friend and she wanted to go hang out or do something. And I said, hey, I'm on a strict schedule, Noah has to feed. And she goes, well, just give him a bottle. And I'm like, I actually don't want to give him a bottle. Like I can, have him on breast and that's important to me. And, it's less stressful for him. It's just, it's being present and, just making sure that you're there for this. And I think that everything about our society, how there's no paid maternity leave or parental leave, I mean, all these things don't really make it easy for women to not be stressed out, to not have stressful pregnancies. And they talk about the fourth trimester, but really postpartum is I think 12 months.
Yeah.
At least, right? 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we just don't have these systems set up to make this easy for us. And so, yeah, if I didn't believe in the power of like nutrition and lifestyle changes before I had this baby, then I mean, I just seeing how I felt during my pregnancy and now postpartum, I feel it's just so, so, so important.
Yeah, I love that. Let's talk about testing because I'm really curious. What kind of like functional tests do you find clinically useful with your clients and maybe even thinking about fertility people who would be seeing you that are hoping to start a family, maybe even later in life like you did?
Yeah. So, I am allergic to cookie cutter plans. The clients that I typically see are women, they're in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And they've, on average, seen 12 doctors who have told them that everything is fine, labs are normal, quote unquote. That's kind of like, but they feel awful, right? They have a whole slew of symptoms. And it's just we know that there's no such thing as like normal diarrhea or normal insomnia, normal eczema, normal depression. Like none of these things are normal.
Mhm.
And so I always find it shocking, right? That like in the kind of like this like Western model of medicine that, a lot of women are being told like, oh, you're just a mom. This is, you're getting older. All moms are stressed out. No moms sleep well. And I'm like, that's just not true. Right. And so I like to run a couple of labs, but only after I do a very in-depth medical history, right? So, like, I want to understand your history. There's an amazing woman. Her name is Caroline Miss, and she wrote Anatomy of the Spirit. And she says your biography, the things that have happened in your past, become your biology.
I love
And
that book.
oh my
I
God.
just have to say that book I read so many years ago and it like catapulted my entire life, I feel. So if you haven't read Anatomy of the Spirit, I highly recommend.
Same Z's. Oh my gosh, I got goosebumps when you said
Yeah.
that it catapulted my life. But and so I really want to understand, right? Like how many pregnancies have you had? Do you have amalgam fillings? Have you had surgeries? Have you had what medicines are you on or what supplements are you on? Like I want to understand, like, do you have a family history of autoimmune disease? And so that impacts what labs I want to run. but like foundational, like everybody gets, certain labs. Um, for sure, an HTMA. And so that's a hair tissue mineral analysis. As you know, right, the minerals are kind of like the spark plugs for the body. They're cofactors of, you know, you need magnesium in order to be able to like metabolize and create and use progesterone, which is the body's natural Xanax, essentially, right? So it's like minerals are so, so, so important, And a GI MAPS is another lab that I think is like really, really important. It tells me what's going on with parasitic infections. Do you have an imbalance of bacteria, good bacteria, bad bacteria in the gut? And then I love the OAT, which is an organic acids test. And also some good old fashioned blood chemistry, right? Just a blood draw where I can kind of see what's going on. And I think the important thing is not only am I running kind of labs that I think a lot of traditional doctors don't run, but I'm also using ranges that are kind of functional ranges.
Mhm.
So I think it's important to understand that when you get your blood run, the lab is just aggregating all of the results from an everly increasingly unhealthy population. And so the lab is saying, this is the range for TSH, or this is the range for ferritin, or whatever it is. But it's just telling you what's common. It's not telling you what's optimal, right? So I think there's kind of two sides to the coin, which is like, what labs are we running? But then what ranges are we using?
Yeah.
Because wouldn't you want to compare where you're at with like where a healthy 45-year-old woman is? And so those are kind of the labs that are kind of like baseline that I really run for like almost everybody. And then on top of it, I may run, later down the road, I may run food sensitivity, but I never start there. I may run like a Dutch, but I never start there because hormones are never a problem and they're a symptom of the problem. I may run like a Cyrex array, like a Cyrex panel for autoimmunity. So there's some other, labs that I like to run that I'll kind of run on a case by case basis, depending on somebody's medical history. So that's kind of how I like to operate, because then I don't have to guess, right? I can just test and I can say, oh, okay, well, if you have off the charts, parasitic infection, candida, and, a bunch of bacteria that are off the charts that, indicate that are often tied with like autoimmune disease or something like that. I know that, okay, maybe the first thing that I need to fix is kind of gut, because if I was to supplement with minerals or, amino acids or vitamins, you're probably not going to absorb anything, right? Because you have such damage in that mucosal layer. So maybe I will kind of say, okay, we're going to work on like a total gut reset first. Then I'll add in, micronutrient supplementation for some other things. But if you didn't know that you needed to address gut first, then you're kind of guessing, right? And so you may start with wanting to balance minerals, but you don't understand that, like, well, magnesium is kind of hard to absorb when gut is a mess, right? So maybe we should fix gut first, right? So that's kind of what I like to run and why.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it'll really be eye-opening for people who are new to the journey too, that there's more you can do than just your standard like day 3 LH, FSH, estradiol. And I love that you brought up the concept of reference ranges, because we're always having that conversation of a reference range is just a population average. And unfortunately, the population's not that great. So we have to look at all labs with a more functional lens. As we wrap up here, Maja, like, how does nutrition play into this for you? Let's say what were maybe 3 of the big nutrition things that helped you conceive Noah?
Well, nutrition is everything. I mean, you get your micronutrients, your vitamins, minerals, amino acids, essential fat acids, you get them from food. You get them from your macronutrients, right? Your proteins, fats, and carbs. And so I think that oftentimes people are very quick to jump to supplements. And I believe in the United States, it's actually very difficult to be micronutrient sufficient with the quality of our soil and the quality of the food that like the general population eats. So I believe that micronutrient supplementation is actually necessary for everybody, baseline period. But when it comes to micronutrients, right? These are the things that allow your metabolism to work, right? Whether it's brain function, liver function, hormones, reproduction, all these things. And so I think the single most important thing, especially with this like population of stressed out women that I work with, is eating 20 to 30 grams of protein within 30 to 45 minutes of waking up. It is the single most important thing that you can do. And I think a lot of women are very surprised because we keep hearing about intermittent fasting. If you are in like any stage of HPA axis dysfunction, intermittent fasting is actually damaging. It's even more damaging. And so these women that I work with are always like, I'm not hungry in the morning. I'm not hungry till 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And that fits in very well with like, oh, I'm intermittent fasting, but you're actually stressing your body out even more. And so for me, like one of the very first things that I do with my clients is I give them a smoothie recipe, which isn't the best thing, but it's better than nothing, right? So if you are a super stressed out, mom of a couple kids and an entrepreneur, or a lawyer or whatever, right, in somebody else's business, then you don't have time to do like eggs and bacon, like whatever it is in the morning. And so would I prefer you to smell, see, and eat and like chew your food? Yes, we can work our way to that. But what's a really good stopgap is for me to give you a recipe that you can essentially pre-make for 3, 4 days in a row. And it takes 5 minutes to make the smoothies, and you just grab one in the morning. And whether you're baby wearing or, carpooling or on a call for work, you're able to eat. So I think from a nutrition perspective, like that is very, very important. I would say supplementing and like balancing minerals, super, super important. I had, for example, absolutely no morning sickness. And I'm like, why, how did I not have morning sickness? And then I started reading a lot of literature that not all morning sickness, but a lot of morning sickness is a magnesium deficiency. And 75% of the US population is deficient in minerals, right? In magnesium specifically. And what we also find is that I think there was essentially research said that like 76% of all women are mineral deficient as well with different micronutrients. And it's like, okay, well, this is very important. Every single cell on your body has a sodium pump on it, right? And if you're not getting enough sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, at least those like 4 basic macro minerals, that's going to be super duper important. And I would say the quality of the food that you're eating is really important. I just read it was an experiment where they took non-organic strawberries and pressed them and separated all of the pesticides out of the strawberries. And they were able to respray new strawberries and have the same effectiveness. So if you think about,
I would love to know how they do that.
right? They were able to like pull out all of the pesticides and chemicals. Well, they're often oil-based, right?
Yeah.
So oil and water separates oftentimes. And so then you think about, okay, I'm eating, foods that have been fed antibiotics and growth hormones and all of these awful things. They're raised in, factory farms where these animals are literally suffering their entire lives. They're eating awful foods. Like if you knew what is being fed to, some of these animals, like other dead animals. I mean, it's just awful, right?
Mm.
Um, and then, when we're looking at like organic foods and stuff like that, pesticides, insecticides, I mean, they're now analyzing the blood of newborns, and I think it's over 200 chemicals are found in this blood. Many of them are these, forever chemicals. So I think eating grass-fed from family farms where you understand, how these animals are raised, and that's easy to do now, right? So Grassroots Co-op is where we get all of our meat. We get it for a month. It gets shipped to our house on dry ice. It's super easy. We eat always organic, no matter what. If there's an option, we spend a ton of money on food, but we don't spend a lot of money on other things, nannies, petties, that kind of stuff, so that we can kind of prioritize. So I would say that those three things, making sure you're eating, good amount of protein, low carb in the morning, mineral supplementation, and then also eating clean, organic, grass-fed foods.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that a lot of our listeners, especially our like over 35 listeners, are going to be really excited to hear your story and also hear some of the ideas you have for maybe avenues that they can walk down. And as we wrap up here, Maja, can you leave our listeners with one fertility tip that you would wish to share with a listener?
So I the first round of the retrieval that we did, we went through all the genetic testing. So it's like, they pulled out 20 some odd eggs, which was amazing, but some of them weren't mature. Some of them didn't fertilize. Some of them didn't make it to day 10 genetic testing. Some of them were not genetically viable, right? So by the time, that we got through all of those steps and we shaved, every single time, I had zero embryos that were viable from that first round. And I remember just being devastated. And I talked to my friend who is a doctor who she encouraged me to do IVF as an insurance policy. And she just had her first IVF baby. And I remember her sitting me down and saying, look, you can either choose to look at every single one of these eggs as like your future unborn child, or you can understand that like right now, it's just like a cluster of cells. And you can mourn like all 27 of those as if they were like children, or you can just kind of take a step back a little bit and understand that like eventually it's a numbers game for the most part, like you're going to be fine. And so that really helped me because I did four more retrievals after that. Because we wanted to get at least three, genetically tested kind of quote unquote perfect embryos. So for me, it helped me kind of in the moment, not to be so emotionally invested in like a cluster of cells. And I'd say the other thing is I only told like one or two people that I was even doing IVF, because I didn't realize, and I was so glad that that happened, because if you do have a loss, or your retrievals don't go as you wanted them to go, then you're having to explain yourself to a lot of people that like don't really understand the process. It's pretty technical and kind of complicated. And so I know you asked for one thing, but those are my two.
No, that's perfect. And sometimes I think, how we kind of talk to our clients about it when they ask these questions, where I'm like, I want you to have a support community, but you get to decide how big that support community is. So if there's people that you just don't want to share, you don't have to. Like, it's okay. You don't have to let them know, but pick your one or two people that are close to you, apart from your partner, that you can at least walk through this with, even if they don't totally understand it, so that you have someone outside of the bubble to be able to kind of go through that with. So I love that. That's a great tip. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
All right, Maja, how can people find out more about you?
You can just go to my website, majamiller.com, majamiller.com. And you can learn a little bit about how I work with my clients. And if you want to get a hold of me, I ask you a couple of questions and then we set up a Zoom call.
Amazing. And I'll make sure that link is in the show notes. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
Oh my gosh, this was so fun. Thank you so much.